Number 1. Josh and his brother Eric loved exploring the Appalachian Mountains, but this trip was different. They decided to camp near Mac's Patch, far from the beaten path, eager for isolation in the crisp golden glow of autumn. By the time they reached the clearing, the sun was already setting, painting the mountains in fiery hues. The vast silence that crept in as night fell was unnerving. The fire crackled, and Josh leaned back, staring at the stars. Eric poked the fire with a stick, muttering about how quiet the woods were tonight. "Not even the wind," he said, his voice low. It was sometime after midnight when Josh first noticed it. Just beyond the firelight's reach, at the edge of the tree line, stood a figure. He froze, blinking to make sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. The figure was unnaturally tall and thin, its long limbs appearing almost stretched. It stood perfectly still, facing them. "Eric," Josh whispered, nudging his brother. Eric turned, his expression quickly matching Josh's wide-eyed fear. "What is that?" "Probably just someone messing with us," Josh said, though he didn't believe it. "Hey!" he yelled, his voice echoing through the trees. The figure didn't flinch. Eric grabbed the flashlight, his hands shaking as he switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on nothing. The figure was gone. Both of them scanned the tree line, their breath quickening. The fire began to flicker violently, as if an invisible wind were pushing it. "We need to go," Eric said, his voice trembling. But before they could move, a low whistle echoed from the opposite side of the clearing. It was soft, almost melodic, but there was something deeply unnatural about it. The brothers whipped around, the flashlight darting through the trees. Again, nothing. Then came the sound of twigs snapping. Closer this time. It was as if someone or something was circling them. Panic set in. They grabbed their gear haphazardly, stomping out the fire before sprinting down the trail. The sound of snapping branches followed them, growing louder, almost as if whatever it was wanted them to know it was there. When they finally reached their truck hours later, exhausted and shaking, Josh turned to lock the door. His heart sank. Standing at the edge of the parking lot, barely visible in the pre-dawn light, was the figure. It didn't move. It just swayed slightly, as though bidding them farewell. Number 2. Kate had always loved the Appalachian Mountains, but her friends thought she was crazy for hiking alone. This time, she had chosen a lesser-known trail near Roan Mountain, wanting to escape the crowds and lose herself in the wilderness. The trail was overgrown, the canopy of trees above making it feel more like twilight than midday. By late afternoon, the air had grown colder, and the woods seemed heavier somehow. As Kate rounded a bend, she froze. Just ahead, a woman stood hunched over, her back to Kate. She was barefoot and dressed in what looked like a tattered, old-fashioned dress, her long dark hair tangled and wild. "Excuse me, are you okay?" Kate called out, her voice breaking the stillness. The woman didn't respond. Slowly, she straightened, but didn't turn around. Kate felt a chill run down her spine. There was something wrong about the way the woman moved. Stiff, almost unnatural. Kate stepped closer, her boots crunching against the gravel. "Hey," she said again, louder this time. The woman turned. Her face was pale, almost gray, with hollow, shadowed eyes that seemed impossibly deep. Kate gasped, stumbling back. The woman's mouth opened as if to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, she raised a trembling hand and pointed past Kate, toward the trail she had just come from. Kate spun around, her heart hammering, but there was nothing there, just the empty trail. When she turned back, the woman was gone. Kate's hike back to her campsite felt like a nightmare. Every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves sent her heart racing. She kept glancing over her shoulder, certain she was being followed, but the woods remained empty. By the time she reached her tent, night had fallen. She didn't sleep, clutching her flashlight and knife as the hours crawled by. In the morning, when the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, she packed her gear and left. Just before she reached the main trailhead, she noticed something odd. Small, bare footprints, as though made by a child, circled her campsite. Number 3. Dylan and his friends were always chasing legends, and the Appalachian Mountains were full of them. This time, they'd set their sights on Dead Man's Hollow, a remote valley said to be cursed. The hike was grueling, but they didn't care. The thrill of exploring the unknown kept them moving. By the time they reached the hollow, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the trees. They set up camp quickly, laughing and joking to keep the creeping unease at bay. It started just after dark. A voice called out from the woods, faint but distinct. "Help, please." The laughter died instantly. "Did you hear that?" Dylan asked, his voice low. "Probably just someone messing with us," one of his friends said, though he didn't sound convinced. The voice came again, closer this time. "Help me." Dylan grabbed his flashlight and stood, his pulse racing. "Hello? Who's there?" He aimed the light into the trees, but it revealed nothing. The group huddled closer to the fire, unease settling over them. Then from the opposite side of the camp, the voice came again. This time, it sounded like Dylan's voice. "Guys, over here." The blood drained from Dylan's face. "That's not me," he whispered. One of his friends, Jake, stood and shouted, "Who's messing with us?" His voice cracked with fear. The woods exploded with noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling, as if something large was moving just out of sight. The group grabbed their knives and flashlights, standing back to back. Then everything went silent. A low, guttural growl echoed through the hollow, followed by a laugh that didn't sound human. It was deep, distorted, and echoed unnaturally. They didn't wait to find out what it was. Grabbing what gear they could, they bolted down the trail, the sound of heavy footsteps following them for what felt like miles. When they finally reached the safety of their car, Dylan turned back toward the trailhead. Standing there, just within the shadows of the trees, was a figure. It was tall, its limbs bent at unnatural angles, and its face, if it had one, was shrouded in darkness. The voice came again, soft and mocking, but this time, it sounded like Jake. "Guys, over here." They never returned to Dead Man's Hollow.